The Grumman F6F Hellcat was designed to replace the F4F Wildcat in US Navy service, using lessons learned in the Pacific Theatre. Designed in close cooperation with active US Navy pilots, the Hellcat was faster than its predecessor and had a better rate of climb. Having a lower set wing allowed the main gear to retract into the wing itself rather than into the body as on the Wildcat. This gave the Hellcat a wider track and much better deck handling. The prototype Hellcat flew on the 26th of June 1942, with the first production aircraft delivered from November of the same year. The Hellcat became available to the UK under the Lend-Lease agreement in 1943. The first were the F6F3, originally called the Gannet 1, but renamed the Hellcat 1, and deliveries started by ship on the North Atlantic convoy routes. The first aircraft entered service with 800 Naval Air Squadron in July of that year, replacing the Hawker Sea Hurricane. In total, 252 Hellcat 1s and 930 Hellcat 2s with more powerful engines were delivered to the UK. The first actions involving Hellcats were in anti-shipping strikes off Norway, and later as fighter escort for attacks on the battleship Tirpitz. However, most of the British Hellcat service was in the Far East. By the end of 1944, 7 aircraft carriers were equipped with the type. Their entire design philosophy had been built around the need to defeat Japanese fighters such as the Zero, but they also excelled in ground attack roles. Hellcats saw action over Burma, Indonesia and Malaya. A major point in its favour was the use of Grumman's own stow-wing wing-folding system that hugely reduced the space needed by the aircraft, either up on the deck or in hangars. At the end of the war, most squadrons had to relinquish their Hellcats under the terms of the Lend-Lease, and they were either disbanded or converted to aircraft such as the late model Seafire. One Hellcat was kept by Captain J. Ivers, the commanding officer of Royal Naval Air Station Lossiemouth, for as late as 1953, after which it eventually made its way to the Fleet Air Arm Museum in Yeovilton in southwest England. Today, 7 Hellcats are still airworthy. All of these are in the USA, although one is painted in Fleet Air Arm colours, and there are about 6 more being restored to full flying condition. In the UK, the only Hellcat remaining is that one kept by Captain Ivers on display in the Fleet Air Arm Museum. There have been many kits of the Hellcat, so this is a briefer look at those you might still reasonably be able to find. Of course, in 1/24 scale, there's the impressive 2019 tooling from Airfix. You can still get these on the second-hand market for somewhere north of £100. Moving to 1/32 scale, there was a Hasegawa kit made from 1972. This was released by Frog in 1973 and then re-released by Hasegawa up until 2003. In 2007, Trumpeter released their own new toolkit in the same 1/32 scale. On to 1/48 scale, and the oldest kit I'll mention today is this 1954 kit from Lindbergh. I mention it only because its most recent re-release was just 53 years later, in 2007. A decade later, Monogram released their first Hellcat, a kit that was sold under the Revel badge in 2012. Fujimi started selling a Hellcat in 1970 that has been reboxed numerous times, including by Bachmann in 1972, by Scalecraft in 1981, and by Testors in 1987. Otaki released a Hellcat in 1/48 scale in 1976. This was taken up by Arri in 1986, then by Airfix from 2000. In 2008, Eduard released their new tool of the Hellcat scene in many variations, including a rebox by Encore Models in 2016 and, perhaps surprisingly, by Academy in 2019. Hobby Boss released their newest tooling in 2009, but by far the most challenging kit I've ever seen in 1/48 must be this skeletal version by Jasmine Models from 2016, essentially just photo etch. In 1/72 now, the Airfix tooling of 1967 has been released on many occasions since, most recently in 1996, and it has also appeared under the MPC badge. Lindbergh also released a kit of the Hellcat in 1967, and like its 1/48 stablemate, has been released on many occasions since, most recently in 2008. Frog's kit from 1972 has similarly also been rebadged by Novo in 1988, by Corpac in the 1990s, and by Intec in the early 2000s. Also from the 1970s is the Helle kit, most recently seen in this 2020 boxing, but also in the 1980s under the Test Stores brand. In 1973, Matchbox released their tool of the Hellcat. This was sold all the way through to the 1992 release in their traditional two colours of plastic, here blue and grey. Hasegawa's Hellcat dates from 1980 and has been released in a dozen boxes or so of different versions and decal options, and Academy made their own new tool in 1992. Into 2001, and Italeri made a new tool of the Hellcat. This was taken up by Revell in 2002 and by Tamiya in 2005. The 2006 Hobby Boss kit is probably the most simple of all, having just the 25 parts, 4 of which are for the fuel tank. Cyber Hobby came to the party in 2011 with a new tooling, later boxed with photo etch parts by Platts in 2018. 2011 was also the year Eduard released their new tooling, a kit many of us are familiar with. Their most recent boxing of this was the F6F5N Night Fighter version in 2022. And finally, going to 1/144th scale, there were kits from Mitsuwa, which was also later released by Revell, and by Platts Model, among others.